Hey, this is Dr. Ben Weitz, host of the Rational Wellness Podcast. I talk to the leading health and nutrition experts and researchers in the field to bring you the latest in cutting-edge health information. Subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast for weekly updates. And to learn more, check out my website, drweitz.com. Thanks for joining me, and let's jump into the podcast. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Today, we have an exciting interview with Dr. Dale Bredesen on the latest testing and research related to Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Bredesen is an internationally recognized neurologist with a specialty in the mechanisms of neurodegenerative diseases. He's now the Senior Director of Precision Brain Health at Pacific Neuroscience Institute here in Santa Monica and the Chief Scientific Officer at Apollo Health. To this day, the prevailing view in the medical community is still that Alzheimer's is a degenerative neurological disease that's ultimately fatal, and at most, we can slow its progression with some of the newest monoclonal antibody drugs. However, Dr. Dale Bredesen has shown that a precision medicine, functional medicine approach has been able to reverse and prevent Alzheimer's disease in the majority of cases, even when there are unfavorable genetics, such as having an ApoE4 gene. Though his work has not yet received the recognition that it should, I predict once it is that Dr. Bredesen will receive a Nobel Peace Prize. But as of now, the Alzheimer's Society of Canada says that Dr. Bredesen's protocol offers false hope. Dr. Dale Bredesen has published over 200 scientific studies and 3 books, The End of Alzheimer's, The End of Alzheimer's Program, and The First Survivors of Alzheimer's, with his 4th book soon to be published, The Ageless Brain. He has published the results of a study using his RECODE precision medicine approach, showing that 84% of 25 patients with dementia or mild cognitive impairment improved over a 9-month program. And this study was published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease in 2022. And this study was repeated, or this program was repeated in another study by another researcher, Dr. Heather Sanderson, using this protocol in 2023 with patients with more severe dementia and getting similar results. There's currently a peer-reviewed study being conducted in 6 different centers around the world using the Bredesen protocol. Today, I would like the first part of our discussion to summarize your precision medicine approach to Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases, review some of the latest developments, and then I'd like to discuss a collection of 3 newer blood tests that can help us to diagnose and track progress for patients with Alzheimer's disease that Dr. Bredesen calls the neurocode. So, Dr. Bredesen, thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Great to talk to you.
Have you found any increase in acceptance by the conventional neurological medical community?
There's beginning to be some recognition that you can actually do something about this. But if you go and ask 10 people on the street at random, 9 or 10 of them will tell you that they think that nothing can be done. And you may have seen just over the weekend there was an opinion piece by a writer, Charles Piller, who writes for Science, the scientific journal called Science. And he was writing about fraud and the amount of fraud that has gone on in Alzheimer's research. And this was widely read. And one of the points he made is that there's nothing that can be done. And here's a guy who's reading about this all the time. And actually, he and I were on Megyn Kelly's show together a few years ago. So he should have been aware of what we're doing. And I sent him some of our papers. And he said, as soon as his book comes out, he'll get to work reading some of these and see what he thinks. So it's unfortunate because just compassionate use dictates that when you have an untreatable disease, if you have anything that is suggestive that you should at least use what you can to hope for best outcomes for literally compassionate use. And this came up way back in the late 1940s, so about 80 years, almost 80 years ago, when Dr. Dana Farber, who was a pathologist, at the time, there was no treatment effective at all for childhood leukemia. And the observation that he made was that childhood leukemia seemed to get worse when people would be treated for their anemia. And one of the things, of course, that was used was folate. And so he thought, is it possible that we could retard the development of childhood leukemia by using an anti-folate? And they started with aminopterin. Of course, later this led to things like methotrexate and dapsone and things like this. And although he just had a few cases and a few had been killed by the treatment, that's how bad it was. He had the first, even somewhat, successes in childhood leukemia, and this changed the field. And now the majority of people with childhood leukemia will survive. So, and that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And so people recognized at the time, hey, this is compassionate use. You've got to start somewhere. And even though there were people killed by the treatment, which we don't see with Alzheimer's treatment, with the approach we're taking, we get people healthier. Then it was still used because we needed it. And I would hope that people would ultimately come to the same conclusion. We want anything we can do to give us better outcomes. I'll tell you, though, Ben, the most important thing that we could all do is early testing. It's just like a pap smear. It's just like a chest x-ray, just like hemoglobin A1C and things like fasting insulin, looking before you have full-blown diabetes and start to have all sorts of glycotoxic problems. You can pick it up early and do something about it. And we have the same now. We have wonderful early tests for literally pre-Alzheimer's disease.
And it's not like you're advocating bloodletting or some of the standard care of medicine years ago that could potentially be harmful. Even if some of those patients didn't improve their brain health, their overall health is going to improve by eating a healthier diet and exercising and getting their blood sugar under control and doing some of the other factors involved in your program.
Yeah, and the bottom line here is that there is a set, and what we spent many, many years in the lab studying what actually gives you this neurodegenerative phenomenon, whether it's Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or Lewy body or frontotemporal dementia or what have you. And what we found is there's a whole set of signals that are synaptoblastic, that are literally creating new synapses, that are helping you to have neuroplasticity, learning and memory, that sort of thing. Then there's a whole set of demands, things that are pulling back, things like inflammation that are telling you pull back, pull back. And so what happens is, as long as you're on the right side, you've got more supporting than you have the detractors, you're in good shape. But as you age and as you now get exposed to various toxins and various infections and have metabolic syndrome and leaky gut and chronic sinusitis and all these things, what happens is your supply goes down, your demand goes up because of the inflammation and toxins and things like that. And now what's happening is your brain literally is switching from a connection mode to a protection mode. It is putting its resources into dealing with these various insults. And so when you do that, of course, you are now decreasing your synaptic number. You don't notice that until, this is again why early testing is so important. You don't notice that you're decreasing synaptic number until you start to have symptoms. And that takes a while. And so they're now saying, wait a minute, I could have remembered this before, or I could have done this before, or I could have been quicker before, or I could have focused better before, those sorts of things. And now you're actually seeing this effect of a reduction in the number of functional synapses in your brain. So as you said, getting in early, and it's absolutely, there are all sorts of diet and lifestyle things that can be helpful, but there's also beyond that, knowing what to look for. There are specific chronic infections that often go undiagnosed. Things like sleep apnea, that is a common contributor, changes in the oral microbiome, specific biotoxins and specific metallotoxins, inorganics, organics. These are the major groups that can give you problems. So identifying those and addressing them, often removing the source, and then detoxing and things like that. Again and again and again, we see people, no surprise, they get back to where the supply is better than the demand, and they bring back the ability. So imagine you had a big box, and you could store, 1,000 of your baseballs in there, and you need your baseballs, to play baseball every day. Okay, so if the box gets smaller, then you starts getting smaller. You're going to say, okay, I can't put any more baseballs in here because it won't hold anymore. And so that's what your brain actually does. It says, look, I'm shrinking in terms of the synapses, and you can even see, of course, the atrophy on MRI. When you do that, it says, okay, the first thing that goes is the ability to add new stuff. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Interestingly, there are two things that go at pretty much the same time. One is what we always hear about, the inability to store new information. So people have trouble learning new things. The great news, they can still do things that they've learned for the rest of their lives. So they're still quite functional. The other thing that goes is in the locus ceruleus. That is the place in your brainstem that projects onto your cortex with the norepinephrine. So this is basically the stuff that is out there when you're when you've got adrenaline going, boom. So what it's really telling you is we don't have room to store more, and we're not going to let you go into turbocharged speed anymore. You can do just fine going on, putting along at 25 or 30 miles an hour. You're going to be able to do a lot of stuff, but you can't stress it out. You can't go into this mode. And you do see people very frequently as they're beginning cognitive decline, they're a little passive. They don't have that spark. And one of the things we hear most frequently as they start to turn around is their spouse will say, wow, they're just so much more engaged. The light has come back to their eyes. They're now able to do the things that they just couldn't do before.
And you were just talking about toxins, and I'm here in Santa Monica, and we've had these horrible fires that have ravaged Los Angeles. And unfortunately, for all the people who've lost their homes and everything else, and as these homes burned, they released all these toxic substances that spread throughout the city, in the air, landed on homes, buildings, ground, everything. And all this soot is liable to contain all sorts of toxins. And we're to think seriously about making sure that we clean these toxins out. And all of us probably ought to be on some preventative detox.
No question about it. One thing would be, take a vacation for a while if you can, get away from that area. Another thing is, you indicated, have some HEPA filters or have some things like that in your home to get rid of. You want these particulates, as well as some of the organics, both of those. So things like, IQ Air and things like that. And there are all sorts of different ones. I'm not a representative for any of them, but any of these things, very, very helpful. There's Molecule, I think, is another one, and there are a number of these. And then, as you said, getting your detox, and then that's a really good idea for anybody. And making sure your glutathione is up to snuff. A lot of people like to take sulforaphanes, making sure you have plenty of fiber in your diet that helps you get rid of these toxins that are in your gut. You're going to have exposure, obviously, through your nose. And so just optimizing these things, having plenty of crucifers, making sure that you can do everything possible for detox. It's actually not even a bad idea to check your genetics, see if you're a good detoxer or a bad detoxer. And there are a number of these groups that do this. 3x4 does this, Intellex DNA does this. I think it's DNA Life is another one. There are various ones to make sure that see if you are a poor detoxer or a good detoxer. And then, of course, having a good low toxin diet, not being exposed to a lot of ultra processed foods, having filtered water, doing sauna. Sauna has been very helpful for a lot of people. Sweating and then using a non-toxic soap to get rid of that sweat. Yeah. It's been shown. I mean, the sweat contains a lot of toxins that are being excreted from your body. Your body's doing everything possible to get rid of these things.
Yeah.
So, and they go, as you know, they affect every organ, including your brain. So there is a lot that people can do, and many things that people are not doing, but a lot we can all do to minimize our toxicity.
And one of the key ways in which your approach is different than the conventional approach is that while we all recognize that amyloid plaques and phosphorylated tau protein are often present in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's, while the conventional neurological community has largely focused on trying to remove the amyloid plaque using monoclonal antibody medications, the results of which have largely been a failure, in my opinion. You have focused on the underlying metabolic, immunological, physiological reasons why the body lays down this protective plaque and these tangles.
Exactly. And, it's a little bit like if you were called to try to improve an area where a lot of people have been killed, and you get out there and you see that the police have guns, you say, okay, if we can just get rid of those police, everything will be okay. No, that's not the way to go. They're there for a reason. So one of the things we've been interested in is, what is the physiological response? Everyone's focused on the pathology. Oh my gosh, look, there's tau. Oh my gosh, look, there's amyloid. Let's get rid of it. That's not the way this works. We want to focus on the physiology. Why is this there? And your body makes the amyloid because it surrounds and kills microbes. It is an antimicrobial peptide. And tau is an antimicrobial protein. So these things are dealing with insults. Interestingly, the amyloid also binds metals. And when you have that combination of an antimicrobial and something that binds metals, that means it's an anti-biofilm agent because it can take apart the biofilm and kill the bugs inside. And amyloid's been shown to have antiviral effects, antifungal effects, antibacterial effects, antiparasitic effects. I mean, it's pretty remarkable stuff. Unfortunately, of course, in the long run, with inflammation, you now start decreasing the neural network. But what we are suggesting is that this amyloid, this response, is something that can protect your brain for years. As long as there's not a lot of inflammation there, you can protect the brain for years. You can isolate these various pathogens and you can sequester them and kill them while your brain goes on functioning normally. And we know there are many people who die, and at autopsy, they have brains with lots of amyloid, but no cognitive problems. So it doesn't make sense. You can't just say this is the cause of Alzheimer's. Sure, it's associated with Alzheimer's, but it's not the only thing that causes it. So we got to kind of separate that. And what we want to do, fine to remove amyloid or tau, as long as you remove the reasons they're there first. And we have seen a number of people where they had the amyloid removed by an antibody and they got worse. So we want to remove the cause of the problem. What are the insults? Is it a metabolic syndrome? Is it, as we were talking about earlier, is it a chronic sinusitis? A leaky gut, so common. Sleep apnea, so common. Changes in the oral microbiome, so common. There was a recent, very interesting paper looking at the brain's microbiome instead of the guts or the oral microbiome. And it turns out the brain actually has a microbiome, which I always thought that it should be sterile, but it's not. There is a microbiome in your brain. But most of the organisms that they find in the brain are oral species. So a lot of what's going on in your brain is related to your dentition, which is one of the reasons I think that best outcomes requires that good, well-trained dentists get involved as well. And I think we're beginning to understand this disease and these neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's much better than ever before.
It's amazing in which the oral microbiome plays a role in heart health, in brain health. It's incredible how all these things are connected.
Yep, absolutely.
So when it comes to diet, you advocate a keto flex diet. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so if you look at all of the different pieces, what do you need? So you know that you need to increase energetics. That's a huge, the six big players in Alzheimer's are energetics, inflammation, toxicity. Those are the biggest three. And then the lesser three are neurotrophins or trophic activity. That's hormones, nutrients, and neurotrophins like NGF and BDNF. Neurotransmitters like acetylcholine. And then interestingly, stress. And as a scientist, I never used to think that stress was going to be a big deal for patients. It turns out it's a huge issue, and no question, it can shrink your brain, that alone. So those are the big players.
What's the mechanism by which stress can shrink your brain?
Yeah, so it's thought that if you look at the production of corticotrophins, so for example, just CRF1 is one example. CRF1 is a receptor in the brain for corticotropin releasing factor, and it actually is basically part of stimulating your brain and saying you're under attack. You need to switch from connection mode to protection mode. So you ramp up your amyloid, you ramp up your tau. And you're pulling back on your neural network. You're switching from this connection mode to protection mode. What's been amazing to me is you see this at every level in the brain. When you make this choice, when you're under assault, you change your likelihood of having thrombosis. So you change your endothelial lining. You change your renin levels. Renin is part of what helps your neurites find the right place. You're now pulling back, you have a low renin, you have less neuroplasticity. You're changing your ApoE signaling. You're literally changing your epigenetics. You're changing the production of amyloid. You're changing the phosphorylation of tau. You're changing something called hyposignaling, which is related to your lysosomes. It's amazing. Your total body, you undergo this shift. It's literally like going from sleep to wakefulness. Your whole systems change when you go from sleep to wakefulness. And the same idea, these systems change when you go from connection to protection.
Fascinating. Last time we spoke, you have mentioned a nutrient called homotaurine that prevents the oligomerization of A beta. Has there been any further progress on that compound?
Yeah, and I should finish responding to your issue of the diet first. And yes, so when you look
okay, well, let's finish with the diet first. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's plant-rich, mildly ketogenic. Doesn't have to be only plants. Wild-caught fish, great. Some grass-fed beef, fine. Some pastured chicken, pastured eggs, fine. Or if you don't want those, fine too. But it's fine to have some. But it's a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. And you need either ketones or glucose to power your brain. Your brain is much like a Prius, that you've got two different things that will power it. And if you're low on both, which if you've got insulin resistance, you typically are low on both, you're sputtering. You don't have that normal. So we want to bring these back for everybody, make them insulin sensitive and give them some ketogenesis. And so I just recommend at the beginning, just take some exogenous ketones. This is why people have had such good results with coconut oil, MCT oil, ketone salts, ketone esters, any way to get that up. Then over time, you'll be able to become insulin sensitive and generate them on your own. But your brain needs that energy. It needs the oxygenation. So if you've got some sleep apnea that's undiagnosed, as so many people do, that needs to be addressed. And this is, again, where wearables are so helpful.
And we need the right essential fatty acids as well, right?
Absolutely. You want to have a good omega-3 index ratio of about 10% or so. For sleep, you want to have at least 1 hour of deep sleep every night, at least an hour and a half of REM sleep, and at least 7 hours of total sleep with an oxygen saturation of at least 94% during the night. So again, the targets that you can do, wearables can be very, very helpful. You want to have this, the high fiber in the diet, which helps with detox and helps improve your lipid status, helps improve your glycemic status. All these things, very, very helpful. Now, you mentioned homotaurine, which is an amino acid, but not one of the 20 building block amino acids. But this thing has an interesting property, and this was shown several years ago by the Alzheimer group, that this actually prevents the oligomerization of the amyloid. When the amyloid comes together to kill bacteria, typically multiple ones stick together, and it's usually in like groups of 3. So, for example, they'll make a 12-mer, 3, 3, 3, 3. And these are much more potent against this. And so when that does that, they can also damage your mitochondria. They're also involved with neurodegeneration. So we're trying to prevent that. And especially for people who are ApoE44, that's 7 million Americans. And unfortunately, most don't know it. It's a good idea for everyone to find out. They actually do quite well with some homotaurine. Now, I've just heard within the last week from Dr. Christine Burke, one of the excellent physicians who's practicing this approach up here just outside Sacramento, that the group that was shipping the homotaurine from Europe has stopped doing that. So I don't know how available it is today.
Oh, interesting.
Certainly, I think it's a promising approach. They're looking at a drug trial with a precursor of it currently, and we'll see where that goes.
And then exercise is super important. And as exercise is also super important for making sure we maintain our muscle and our bone density in a similar way to make sure we maintain our brain.
Absolutely. So it's important to have aerobic, and these are really synergistic. It's important to have some strength training, which really does different things that really helps your insulin sensitivity, for example. And people see again and again that's associated with longevity. So it's a very important piece of this. Some people like to use Katsu bands, which are these resistance bands, which kind of gives you more bang for your buck. Some people like to use EWOT. EWOT is one of my personal favorites because it gives you both the aerobic part, you get better blood flow, but you also get better oxygenation. So that is. And
EWOT is exercise without oxygen.
EWOT is exercise with oxygen.
With oxygen. Okay.
So it's giving you extra oxygenation. So that's all good. And then sleeping. We just talked about stress, a huge issue. Again, I like to use my wearable and just look at heart rate variability.
Is that the Oura Ring? Is that what you use?
I use an Apple Watch, but some people like Oura Rings. Absolutely. Our daughters really like those. And others like Garmin or Fitbit or any of these things. Whatever you like, whatever you feel comfortable with, they can be helpful to you. Of course, another wearable that's so helpful is the CGMs, the continuous glucose monitors that so many people, you can now get them over the counter, which is fantastic. So you can look to see, are you spiking? Are you troughing? They're both a problem. If you're spiking your glucose, that is a problem that's going to give you insulin resistance. If you are going down in the trough, like a lot of people will wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. and they don't know why they're waking up until they do CGM. And it turns out their glucose is down to 45. So they're not kicking in that glucose when they need to. And that's often associated with a high carb diet. So you want to smooth that out.
I've really been enjoying this discussion, but I just want to take a few minutes to tell you about a product that I'm very excited about. Imagine a device that can help you manage stress, improve your sleep, and boost your focus, all without any effort on your part. The Apollo wearable is designed to do just that. Created by neuroscientists and physicians, this innovative device uses gentle vibrations to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, helping you feel calmer, more focused, and better rested. Among the compelling reasons to use the Apollo wearable are that users experience a 40% reduction in stress and anxiety. Patients feel that they can sleep. Their sleep improves up to additional 30 minutes of sleep per night. It helps you to boost your focus and concentration. And it's scientifically backed. And the best part is you can get all these benefits with a special $40 discount by using the promo code Weitz, WEITZ, my last name, at checkout, to enjoy these savings. So go to Apollo Neuro and use the promo code Weitz today. And now back to our discussion. I was just talking to a patient and he says, well, I keep seeing my primary doctor and I'm at pre-diabetic. I'm almost at diabetic, but he's waiting until I'm diabetic before he treats me.
And that's such old-fashioned, just outdated, antiquated thinking, unfortunately.
Right. All these things happen, these chronic diseases gradually happen. We need to catch these early and not wait until you have frank disease.
As early as possible. That's the trick.
And when it comes to cognitive function, we've got to catch this as early as possible. And even before mild cognitive impairment, which, as you've pointed out, is actually an advanced state.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Telling someone they have mild cognitive impairment is a little bit like telling them they have mildly metastatic cancer. It's a relatively late stage. So when you develop dementia with Alzheimer's, you go through 4 stages. You have a stage that is asymptomatic. And the good news is we can now pick this up with p-tau 217. Then you go through a stage where you have SCI, subjective cognitive impairment. By definition, that means you know something's not quite right, but you're still able to test normally on cognitive testing. If we could just get people in those 2 stages to come in, then there would be very little dementia. You don't have to get further. We have pretty much 100% improvement in SCI. In the MCI, as you mentioned, in our trial, 84% of people got better, but you had to work much harder with MCI than you do with SCI to get things to turn around. That's the third of 4 stages. SCI lasts on average about 10 years. Then you go to MCI, which lasts a few years. But each year with MCI, you have a 5 to 10% chance of converting to the 4th and final stage, which is dementia. Now, we've had some people, I've just been hearing some, where they were all the way down to significant dementia and they've been better, but they haven't come all the way back to perfect. They come back from dementia to MCI, or they come back from MCI to SCI. So we want to get people to come in earlier to get much more complete turnarounds. So yes, MCI is the third of 4 stages. And by definition, what that means is now you're not testing normally on cognitive testing. Now the tests are showing some abnormalities. However, you're still able to do your activities of daily living. You're still able to care for yourself. That's all part of MCI.
And you're using this approach, and other practitioners are, including myself, for other neurological diseases like Parkinson's, other forms of dementia, and I understand you're also experimenting with patients with ALS.
So if you just can go back to what drives these diseases, it's this mismatch. It's just not enough supply, too much demand. Now, you have to adapt it for each disease. So in Parkinson's, the common things are not so much about what you see in Alzheimer's. It's really more about exposure to organic solvents, trichloroethylene, dieldrin, PCE, DDT, paraquat. All these sorts of things are associated more with Parkinson's. And so we want to focus on those. But we still want to obviously improve health with it. In fact, one of the best things for Parkinson's patients happens to be exercise. Huge. We know that in Parkinson's, the rate limiting step, the problem with the nervous system, is at the level of the mitochondria, and specifically mitochondrial complex 1. So that we then gives us a lot of understanding of what we want to do. We want to support the mitochondria to get these people to be better. Now, for others, so we have some people with macular degeneration who are doing better as well. That's a different adaptation. They have different things. So each of these has its own signature because each one has its own Achilles heel. These all come because of the way we evolved. We evolved to select for performance over durability. So you keep doing that. And of course, if you don't select for performance, the creatures that did select for performance kill you and they survive. So because of the way evolution works, always selecting for performance at the expense of durability, we have these remarkable neural networks. You can store as much information in one human brain as over 2,000 home computers. It's
Wow.
equal to some of the largest supercomputers. And in this tiny little 1,400 gram, 3-pound thing in your brain. It's incredible. But in so doing, in selecting for these amazing neural networks, you're giving up some durability. If you look at ALS, again, what you've selected for is this incredible power amplification. You go from a thought to the maximal use of your muscles like that. And the amplification is huge. In fact, there's more amplification going from one thought to maximal muscle use, which a human can do, than there is from going into your car and stomping on the accelerator and getting up to 300 or 400 horsepower. You actually get more amplification. It's incredible. You look at Parkinson's, incredible motor modulation. Look at what Simone Biles can do. That shows you what a human brain is capable of with fine tuning of the motor modulation. And then look at macular degeneration. Humans, their macula, with support, appropriate vascular oxygenation support, and not too much inflammation, they can distinguish about 1 million color variations. So all of these things are these amazingly finely tuned networks, and it's just like taking out your super tuned Ferrari on the road. You can get into problems. You're not going to drive that Ferrari at super high speed for 500,000 miles. It's just not going to work that long.
Yeah, you were talking about ALS. With the ALS, boy, you see that neurological collapse, that muscle atrophy. It just kicks in so severe so quickly. It's a horrific disease.
And again, if everybody could have a way to check that before it ever happens, wouldn't it be great?
Right.
To my knowledge, that's the one area where there's not a great, very early test. We've got good ones for Alzheimer's, fairly good ones for Parkinson's, very good ones for macular degeneration. We don't have a great pre-diagnostic test for ALS yet.
Right. Is anybody using your approach with ALS right now and getting some success?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
And this is just the beginning, as you indicated. I mean, this is a tough one because it tends to be faster than Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's people, have years of decline. ALS, if you at presentation, if you have any symptoms above the neck, the average time of survival is 1.5 years. Wow. If you don't have anything above the neck, the average is 3 years. So it's a tough one. And the good news is we understand a little bit about the Achilles heel in that neural subnetwork, which is the power amplification one. And it does seem to be about glutamate uptake. You're using this excitotoxic neurotransmitter, glutamate, which stimulates and helps you to have this dramatic burst of muscular power, et cetera, but also can damage neurons over time. And so if you don't take that stuff up, once you liberate it into the synapse, if you don't take it up quickly and inactivate it, then it can be damaging. So anything that damages your ability to take this stuff up and inactivate it will increase your risk for ALS, unfortunately.
Do we have some ways to take up glutamate and inactivate it?
So normally the astrocytes do that. So your glial cells around will do that. So if you've got a mutation in in one of these transporters, that's a problem. If you've got oxidative damage to the transporters, if you overstimulate, as you know, this nice work from a group that is looked at BMAA, beta methylamino alanine. So BMAA is one which is produced by things like cyanobacteria. And that also can be a problem because it acts like the glutamate, and so it can continue to stimulate. So there's some studies now that they're doing. Dr. Paul Allen Cox and his group, and they're looking at L-serine as a way to interfere with this glutamate toxicity, and we'll see. They have not reported their results yet, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm hopeful that will be helpful.
Interesting. Let's talk about your study that's currently underway right now at 6 different centers, and what a challenge it must be to conduct a study with so many different variables. The model of what is considered a scientific study that's valid is the drug trial, where half the patients get the drug and the other half of the patients get the placebo, and everybody's getting the exact same treatment, whereas a precision medicine, a functional medicine approach requires individualized care.
Absolutely. So The idea here was, instead of just ahead of time saying everyone's going to get the exact same thing or they're going to get a placebo, the idea is we're going to look to see what's driving it in each person. So each person is going to get a personalized precision medicine approach that addresses their various things, and they're different for each person. Some people will have sleep apnea, some won't. Some will have HSV1, some won't. Some will have P. gingivalis, some won't, and so on and on. So these are all going to be addressed, and we're just actually finishing in a couple of days. We are finishing enrollment, and so the trial will be over by the end of October. We should have results to report shortly after that. So far, things look very good. We did a kind of halfway analysis, where do things stand? Things look good, and we are seeing differences. So the control group in this case is getting standard of care. They get the standard drug treatment if they have dementia. And we're looking at people who have both MCI and early dementia. That's the group, very similar to what's been used in the drug trials. So that's the idea. And as you indicated, in the past, people have said, well, you can't do a multivariable trial. But the argument is, but this is a multivariable disease. So you've got to look at these different things. And I'm really honored to be working with such outstanding physicians. We have Dr. Anne Hathaway here in Marin, and Dr. Kat Toops, Dr. Christine Burke, Dr. Nate Bergman, David Haas, and Dr. Craig Tanio down in Southern Florida. So we're really fortunate to have some outstanding physicians doing this trial.
Yeah, I think we need a different paradigm to understand the type of medicine that I know I'm practicing with functional medicine, because the trial, the double-blind placebo-controlled trial that's used to test drugs is just not appropriate for this type of medicine.
Yeah, this is a network insufficiency. So you've got to look at all the different players in making that network work.
Are there any new peptides or any other things that you're finding it might help a little bit in moving the needle?
I mean, there are all sorts of things that are helpful, that are interesting, I would say. But the most important thing, we're finding that the people who don't do well aren't doing the basics. They aren't just doing the. So you really have to optimize the basics. And that's 7 things. You talked about it. Diet, exercise, sleep, stress, brain training. So brain stimulation and training, things like photobiomodulation, very helpful. Detox and some targeted supplements. Those are the basics. And then beyond that, the specifics. Are there any infections that you have to treat? And are there any toxins that you have to detox from? Those are the critical pieces to do this. Now, there are some new things. The armamentarium is growing rapidly. And you mentioned homotaurine. There's something interesting called Pectisol that a number of people have used. And one of the things that does is also to prevent the oligomerization of the A beta. That looks quite promising.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
I love Dr. Elias. I've talked to him a number of times.
Exactly. Yeah. So that, and then as he would note, when they were doing their trials, they noticed that people were actually doing better with their cognition. I think that's a promising avenue as well. Of course, there's some stem cells, adipose-derived regenerative cells, ADRCs, that have had some good results in people. There's urolithin A. There's been a lot of push on urolithin A, which supports mitochondria. Of course, PQQ also increases mitochondrial number. So those things can both be helpful. And then there's an interesting new group called Mitrix with Tom Benson and his group. And they are looking at what is essentially mitochondrial transfusions. So isolating mitochondria that are healthy and then giving you these in these little encapsulated, what they call mitelets, basically little encapsulated way to deliver large numbers of healthy mitochondria, because so many of these diseases, energetics plays a role. And so
so it's mitochondrial transplants or something.
Yeah, essentially like a transfusion of healthy mitochondria.
Wow.
Exactly. I think it's promising. And again, I think if you look at one advance that's the most important of all, it is earlier detection. Because we're seeing it every day. The people who come in early, We now can do this pretty much every time. It's pretty easy to make people who are in really early stages do well and stay well. We just published a paper, the first example in history of people who stayed improved and stayed better, sustained their improvement for over a decade. And that's freely available online, so anybody can read it.
And what is that paper called, and where is it published?
Yes, it is sustained improvement. It's published in a journal. If you look at biomedicines, or just look up under my name and biomedicines, you'll see it. It's, again, freely available online. Most of our papers are, so that you can see these. We're seeing this sort of thing. So again, get in early. It's so easy. The later, you can still get some improvement, but it's harder. You've got to do more. And it's not as likely for improvement. Coming back to you mentioned neurocode earlier. This is a very important advance. I think it's the most important test that's come out in years, and I've just had my own done a few weeks ago. So what we've done is we've worked with neurocode because they have the most sensitive approach. And it combines 3 blood tests. So simple, you don't have to have a PET scan. You don't have to have an MRI. Get this blood test. It's called brain scan. And you can literally get a brainscan.com. And I had it drawn at my house. You can have it drawn by mobile phlebotomy, or you can go into a draw station, either way. And it looks at
getting it through neurocode or brain scan, is that different than just ordering these 3 tests through LabCorp or Quest?
Yes, it's different because this group neurocode, they are pioneered this. LabCorp has kind of copied it, but theirs is not as sensitive. Specifically, the neurocode uses what's called single molecule assay, SIMOA, SIMOA, and they use a special machine called AltzPath. So they have the most sensitive look, and they're actually coming out with an even more sensitive one in the next few months. So very excited about that.
Really? What is going to be different about that one?
I don't know yet. They've been reporting this to us, so I'm excited to see. But they're actually upping the sensitivity. So again, this would go back. Imagine, 50 years ago, people would tell you, "Oh, Ben, you got diabetes. I'm so sorry." And already you got diabetes. You're already damaging your eyes. You're damaging your kidneys. You're damaging your blood vessels. Now they can tell you, "Oh, you've got a high fasting insulin. You're headed for diabetes. You don't ever have to get it because we can detect it early, pre-diabetes, and literally pre-diabetes." That's where we are now with this test. We can detect pre-Alzheimer's and pre-Alzheimer's. And so it looks at p-tau 217. This is what happens is really fascinating with tau. So tau is a molecule that stabilizes your microtubules. So when you're sending out these neurites to make connections, you're stabilizing these with tau. So it is part of connection mode. When your body senses, things are bad, there's an insult, I've got to pull back now, it phosphorylates the tau. So you have an enzyme called GSK3 beta. So this thing phosphorylates the tau. It changes the shape and the charge because of the phosphorylation. It pops off the microtubule. And now this becomes a prion that goes and looks to kill bacteria. So you kind of go double duty. This thing one day is working to stabilize your connections. And now it says, no, you're needed for protection. It now changes shape and it now starts to kill bacteria. It's kind of amazing.
Wow.
What a system. It's like, go back to the Minutemen from the Revolutionary War, where they were farmers and all of a sudden the British are coming, they give them a musket and now they're out there as soldiers. It's the same sort of thing. This changes. And
isn't that interesting? And you started your career studying prions.
Yeah, exactly. So these things they are prions, and prions are involved in all the major neurodegenerative diseases. Now we believe we understand why. These things are anti-infectious agents. They're good ways to they're antimicrobial proteins. They're protecting you. So what happens is you can measure the p-tau 217 in your blood. Then the second thing is called GFA.
And what does the p-tau 217? This tells you whether or not you have Alzheimer's?
Right. So it tells you, are you on the side of pulling back where you got a lot of phospho-tau, or are you on the side of connection where your phospho-tau will be low? So you want your phospho-tau in this neurocode assay, the brain scan, to be 0.34 or less. And if it's high, and especially if it's 0.63 or higher, that's associated with amyloid in your brain and with some cognitive changes. In between there, you've got an area that is indeterminate, which is 0.34 to 0.47. And then you got the 0.47 to 0.63, which is a little bit high, but not yet associated with cognitive decline. So you want to pick it up there early. And I tell you, we've got some amazing stories just in the first couple of months of these things. We've had a number of people who were ApoE44, so they're in the worst genetic group. They already had symptoms several years ago. They went on the program, the protocol we developed. They got better. Now they check their phospho-tau and it's normal. Now, wow. I wish we had it, several years ago when they started. It would have been so helpful, but it just wasn't available then.
Right.
To have it be normal when they've already had symptoms is unheard of. So it really shows we're on the right track here, and I'm very excited about that. Then I should mention the third test is NFL, neurofilament light, and that gives you complementary information. It says, are my neurons being damaged? And that can be from a car wreck. That can be from too much playing football and get hit in the head, punching. It can be from a vascular disease, Alzheimer's, frontotemporal dementia. But for example, I'll see people, and so we have a report that we write up for each person. If you have high phospho-tau but low NFL and low GFAP, the GFAP tells you about inflammation, you don't have very active Alzheimer's. But we'll see them sometimes where we'll not only have the high phospho-tau, but we'll have high GFAP and high NFL. And that tells you this is active, very active, ongoing, and you really better jump in there and do everything possible. Then the good news, we can follow these as they come back to normal, as people do the right thing. So this is going to change and allow so many people to avoid Alzheimer-related dementia because you can look at this early and prevent the continuation, prevent the progression.
And GFAP is glial fibrillary acidic protein.
Right. So GFAP, that is actually an intermediate filament protein. So what happens is your astrocytes are sitting there and they're in a quiescent state. When you need help, when you've got an inflammation, when your neurons are damaged, they're basically caretakers for the neurons. You turn them on, you say, the alarm goes off. Hey, we need you guys. They jump into action and they swell, they get bigger, and they make more of this GFAP as they're getting to be larger and jumping into action. So that's what you're measuring in the blood. You're measuring that GFAP. Some of it will get into the blood, and you can see it go up as you have inflammatory things going on in your brain.
Wow. Let's see. Can other diseases, degenerative diseases of other kinds related to kidneys or cardiovascular make these markers change, or these are purely related to neural inflammation?
Yeah. So the phospho-tau is specific for Alzheimer-related processes. By the way, it's also teaching us something about what's giving you more risk. One of the things that will bump it up a little and tell you, yeah, this is pushing you toward Alzheimer's is COVID-19. So just having that inflammation from the COVID will bump it up a little bit. Then the second thing is the GFAP so the p-tau is specific. The GFAP is non-specific for inflammation. So anything that's causing the inflammation and attempted repair bumps up that GFAP. And then the NFL is specific for neuronal damage, but not just Alzheimer's. So you'll see it with Alzheimer's sometimes, you'll see it with frontotemporal dementia. So one of the classics is if someone comes in and they're having problems with cognition, if their p-tau is completely normal, but their NFL is high, you've got to be suspicious of frontotemporal dementia. Another way to go. You also could be suspicious of Lewy body disease. They are non-Alzheimer conditions. And so it's really helpful now to say, this person, you need to focus on this person, you need to focus on that. So again, there's so much that can be done. The armamentarium in these diseases is just expanding rapidly. Nobody should be getting Alzheimer's anymore. This is rapidly becoming an optional condition. If everybody would just get checked, and we recommend just check your brain scan, check the neurocode numbers, this like so-called brain scan, when you turn 35, and then just every 5 years, 40, 45. When you hit 60, do it every 2 years. So that makes it easy. You don't have to do it very often. But just like everyone should know their blood pressure, everyone should know their lipid status, everybody should also know their p-tau status, because it is such an important determinant and will allow you to prevent problems in the future.
That's great. So where should listeners, patients, practitioners go to find out more about your programs that you offer?
Yeah, so the easiest thing to do, and I think the best, is just go and look at so-called MyCQ test. So CQ is your cognitive quotient. So if you just go to MyCQ test, that's free. It's a free way to look at what is your cognitive status. And then we recommend, again, that everybody get the brain scan so that they can make sure not to have problems. And you can do that at getabrainscan.com. You can follow what we're doing on Facebook, Dr. Dale Bredesen. You can follow it on X. You can follow it on Instagram. We just started recently. You can also follow it on Blue Sky. So any of those things. And as you mentioned earlier, several books out. Have a new one coming out March 25th, which is called The Ageless Brain. And the whole idea of that was, we've talked a lot about what to do about Alzheimer's. What about for all of us? How do we get to make sure the whole goal of this is protection and performance? We want to make it so that everybody's brain span is as long as their lifespan. The big problem, of course, is people who live to 85 and their brain only is working well until 65. That's 20 tough years. When I talk to like the YPO group, I always say, all these anti-aging guys, and I'm like, how many people want to live to 140? Everybody is like, okay. And they say, and spend half of that time in a nursing home with dementia. Like, whoa. So, we want to avoid that. We want to make sure that our brains function for as long as our lifespan is. Get that brain span up. And that's what the ageless brain is all about. So I have a couple examples I give of people catching early. In one case, catching Parkinson's early. In one case, catching Alzheimer's early. Neither one has any long-term problems. They do very well because looking at it early and doing the right thing makes all the difference.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Bredesen.
Great to talk to you always. Thank you so much for the discussion, and look forward to continued discussions in the future. This is an exciting time,
Oh, yes, it's very exciting.
My career, we had nothing. When I was training as a neurologist, we had nothing to offer people. And so just to be able to see people getting better, it just makes my day.
That's great. Thank you for making it all the way through this episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you could go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a 5-star ratings and review. As you may know, I continue to accept a limited number of new patients per month for functional medicine. If you would like help overcoming a gut or other chronic health condition, and want to prevent chronic problems, and want to promote longevity, please call my Santa Monica Weitz Sports Chiropractic and Nutrition office at 310-395-3111, and we can set you up for a consultation for functional medicine. And I will talk to everybody next week.